Imagine being thousands of miles away from home, wearing the uniform of your country, standing watch in a dangerous place where every day could be your last. You think about your family, your land, and the life you've built back home. That thought keeps you going. It gives meaning to the sacrifice. Now picture this: after months of service, after missing birthdays and holidays, you finally come back, only to discover that the ranch you worked for, the home you paid for, the place you called yours has been sold, and not sold by the bank. Not sold because of some massive debt. It was taken and auctioned off by your own neighborhood association. It sounds unreal, doesn't it? But this is exactly what happened. While deployed, this man was fighting battles abroad, unaware of the one being fought silently back home. A stack of small HOA dues, late fees, and legal add-ons quietly turned into a weapon. While he was away protecting the freedoms of others, his own freedom to hold on to his property was slipping through his fingers. Think about that for a moment. You're risking your life overseas. But the real danger comes from a line in a contract you signed years ago when you bought your home. A tiny clause that most people never even notice suddenly has the power to decide if you'll have a home to come back to. This wasn't a bank foreclosure, not a massive unpaid mortgage. It was something as small as neighborhood dues, something that could be a couple $100s that spiraled into a nightmare. The Homeowners Association, an organization meant to keep lawns trimmed and fences painted, turned into something far more powerful. They didn't wait for his return. They didn't make special arrangements. They didn't honor his service or his sacrifice. Instead, they used the letter of the law to sell what he had spent years working for. And here's the part that makes people stop in their tracks. It wasn't just one house. The story spread that the Army itself had to get involved, and suddenly, the HOA wasn't just facing one man. They were facing the weight of an entire institution. What started as a fight over dues became a clash between a deployed soldier's right to his home and the unchecked authority of a neighborhood board. This is more than just one man's struggle. It makes you question how something like this could even be possible. How can a neighborhood association, a group of people you probably see at the grocery store, have the legal ability to strip someone of their property while they're serving their country? How many others might be at risk without even realizing it? The shock of it, the injustice, is enough to make anyone wonder, if it could happen to him, who else could it happen to? And if the Army hadn't stepped in, would he have lost everything forever? He was a soldier, but before that he was a homeowner. He had a ranch, a piece of land that wasn't just dirt and wood, but years of work and dreams stacked together. Owning property for many people is more than shelter. It's a legacy. It's safety. It's proof that all those long hours, all that effort, wasn't for nothing. And for him, it meant even more, because while he was away, that land stood as a promise that his family had stability, that his sacrifices were paying off. But to understand what happened, you need to know who he was up against. A homeowners association, or HOA, sounds harmless at first. On the surface, it's a group that makes sure neighbors follow community rules. They'll send reminders if your grass grows too tall, or if your fence doesn't match the others. They collect monthly or yearly fees to take care of things like common areas, pools, and landscaping. That's what people think when they hear, ha. What most homeowners don't realize, though, is how much legal power these associations hold. Hidden in the contracts everyone signs when moving in is the right for the HOA to place a lien on your property. That means if you fall behind on dues, sometimes as little as a few $100s, they can take serious action. And if those dues aren't paid, they can go even further: foreclosure. Yes, the same process a bank uses when someone can't pay their mortgage. The difference? With an HOA, the debt doesn't have to be massive. Sometimes a debt smaller than a car payment can put your entire house at risk. For a man deployed overseas, this was a trap he couldn't see coming. Bills were piling up, letters were sent, deadlines passed. But he wasn't home to check the mailbox. He wasn't home to negotiate. He wasn't even home to open the door if someone came to deliver a notice. And while he was fighting for his country, the HOA moved forward step by step. All perfectly legal, all documented, until his ranch was sold off at auction for pennies on the dollar. Imagine his shock when he returned. To him, this wasn't just paperwork. It was betrayal. He hadn't abandoned his property. He hadn't walked away from his obligations. He had simply done what his country asked of him: deploy, serve, protect. And in his absence, the very system that should have honored his sacrifice instead punished him. The pain was deeper than financial loss. It cut into trust, into the belief that when you do the right thing, your community will stand by you. Instead, he came home to find strangers living where he once sat with his family. His ranch, his pride was gone, and all of it started with an organization that most people think is just there to keep the neighborhood looking neat. The stage was set for a battle bigger than unpaid dues. It was no longer just about him and an HOA. It was about a soldier's rights, the law's blind spots, and the question of what protections a man truly has when he leaves everything behind to serve. When the Army became aware of what had happened, the situation shifted. This was no longer just a personal fight between one man and his HOA. It was about something larger, about how deployed service members are supposed to be protected by law. There is an act called the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, or SCRA. It exists for moments like this. Its purpose is simple, to make sure that men and women in uniform are not punished, back home for circumstances they can't control while serving. The law is supposed to shield them from things like foreclosures, evictions, or repossessions while they are away. On paper, it looks like strong protection. In reality, it doesn't always work the way it should. In his case, the HOA claimed it had followed procedure. Notices were sent, fees went unpaid, legal steps were taken. But how much does a letter in a mailbox mean when the owner of that mailbox is thousands of miles away on deployment? That gap between what the law says and what actually happens created the perfect storm. And that is when the Army stepped in. The idea of the military stepping into a property dispute might sound unusual, but it shows how serious this case was. If a soldier could lose his home simply because he was away doing his duty, then every soldier was at risk. What happened next became bigger than one man's ranch. It became a test of whether the system truly valued the people it sends to war. The pressure worked. The Army's involvement made it clear that this was not going to disappear quietly. Suddenly, the HOA was not just facing one homeowner they thought they could overpower. They were facing the reputation of an entire institution. A wrong against one soldier became a wrong against all. That leverage changed everything. Houses that had been sold were forced to be returned. What was taken had to be given back. For many watching, this moment was eye-opening. People who never questioned how much authority an HOA has suddenly saw just how far that power could go and how dangerous it could be if unchecked. More importantly, it showed that without protection, even those who risk everything for their country could come home with nothing. But the outcome also left behind an uncomfortable truth. It took the weight of the Army to reverse the injustice. Not every service member has that kind of force behind them. What about those who don't know the law? What about those who can't fight back in court? The case exposed cracks in the system. It showed how technicalities and fine print could strip someone of their most basic security, their home, even when they are sacrificing everything abroad. And as the dust settled, the story raised questions that reached far beyond one ranch, one HOA, or even one man. Questions about fairness, about protection, about whether the people who defend a nation can rely on that nation to defend them in return. What happened to this soldier shook people far outside his neighborhood. It wasn't just a story about a ranch or even about one man's property. It was a spotlight on the fragile line between security and loss, and how quickly that line can vanish when rules are written without compassion. For anyone who has served, the idea of home is more than four walls and a roof. It's the place you carry in your mind when you're far away. It's what keeps you steady when days are long and nights are dangerous. To come back and find it gone, sold to strangers over something as small as missed dues, cuts deeper than money. It sends the message that service is valued abroad but overlooked at home. The Army's involvement made this case extraordinary. Their power forced the HOA to undo what it had done. Homes that had been auctioned were reclaimed. A wrong was corrected. But the very fact that it took such force to reach justice is what unsettled so many people. What happens to the families who don't get national attention? What happens to the soldier who comes home quietly, without a spotlight, and finds his life dismantled piece by piece? That's the lesson this case leaves behind. HOAs are not just small boards with limited influence. They hold immense power, often with little oversight. A few $100s can turn into legal fees, penalties, and eventually foreclosure. For a deployed service member, those notices and bills can slip by unnoticed, and by the time anyone realizes, the property is gone. This isn't only about military families, though they face the highest risk. It's about every homeowner living under an HOA. How many people read the fine print of their contracts? How many realize they've signed away the right to control what happens if they fall behind? For many, this case became a wake-up call. An HOA is not just about lawn rules. It can decide if you keep your home. The story also raised another difficult layer. This wasn't just any soldier. It was a black man. And in communities across the country, Many people saw in this story echoes of deeper issues: unequal treatment, systemic barriers, and the sense that justice comes slower, or not at all, depending on who you are. Whether or not race played a direct role, the optics mattered. It reminded people that when power meets vulnerability, outcomes are not always fair. In the end, the houses were taken back, but the questions remain. Should HOAs have the ability to sell someone's property so easily? Are the current protections for service members truly enough? And what does it say about our system when a man can fight overseas with honor, but still come home to a fight for his own front door? This story doesn't just linger because of its drama. It lingers because it makes people ask themselves, if it could happen to him, what would stop it from happening to me?